Tonight, Pentagon officials tell CNN North Korea's latest launch shows Kim Jong-un's missile program is moving forward.
North Korea is a big problem, and we will deal with that very strongly.
As the president considers how to respond, questions about how the White House handled the chaotic hours after North Korea's leader celebrated test launching a ballistic missile 300 miles off the Korean coast towards Japan. It happened Saturday night, just as President Trump, the Japanese prime minister, their wives and aides were settling into an opulent dinner at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. In full view of members and guests of the swanky club, a flurry of activity at Trump's dinner table. One diner posted it to Facebook. Holy moly! Fascinating. Guests at the dinner describing to CNN the president making phone calls, talking with aides, reading documents with Prime Minister Abe, aides using cell phones to help them see in the candlelight, a potential security issue.
Well, that shouldn't happen in an uncleared facility. The basic problem here, though, is what do we do with the crazy North Korea?
Eventually, the two leaders left the table and held an impromptu press conference.
North Korea's most recent missile launch is absolutely intolerable.
President Trump's reaction? He cast aside prepared remarks seen on the podium, a joint statement with Japan. Instead, one sentence, 24 words.
I just want everybody to understand and fully know that the United States of America stands behind Japan, its great ally, 100%.
Not quite the same tone as when he tweeted a stern warning in January. North Korea just stated that it is in the final stages of developing a nuclear weapon capable of reaching parts of the U.S. It won't happen.
Not since this hot mess of a three-way has a handshake gotten so much attention, clocked at almost 19 seconds. This became the handshake that left the Japanese Prime Minister shaken.
Start the car! But just watch his expression at the end. I feel you.
For a guy who once called the handshake barbaric,
I'm also very much of a germaphobe.
Donald Trump has been risking germs galore with his over-the-top handshakes, many of which include a yank, be it his Supreme Court nominee or his VP. Call it what you will. The pull in, the tug, the yank and pull, the grab and jerk. When he did it to a winner of The Apprentice, it seemed like a tug of war.
Donald Trump can't shake hands right.
The more he likes you, the more he tugs and shakes. Body language expert Chris Ulrich says President Trump starts with a submissive gesture.
His hand is open, almost putting his own hand in like a beggar's pose, giving the other person the upper hand.
But then he reasserts his dominance.
He literally pulls people off their feet, off their balance for a moment.
And he often seals his alpha handshake with a pat, a hand hug. But when SNL's Trump shook with Vladimir Putin, it was Putin who tugged and patted Trump. At least a long handshake gives photographers time to get their shots. When the president asked about the Japanese photogs,
what are they? Please, look at me.
Instead of turning to the photogs as requested, the president gazed at the prime minister.
Thank you, everybody.
On Monday, Canada's leader shook President Trump's hand, but he held his own, resisting any tugging, and inspiring headlines like Trudeau one-ups Trump at the handshake game. With Trump yanking at a rate of 2 or 3 times in 10 seconds, you almost need a hand to hold you up. Ginny Mo, CNN, New York.
Welcome back. 3 weeks into the Trump presidency, one lesson we do know: he's not going to give up his Twitter account. The president's very active, usually in the morning. How many tweets? Let's take a look at this. We have to make graphics in television. 47 tweets. We made this just before the show. He's up to 49 now. The president is up and tweeting from Florida this morning. 49 tweets from @RealDonaldTrump in just the past week. 9 of them before 8 a.m. He likes to get up in the morning, he watches television, he reads the paper, and he reacts on Twitter. They come in different shapes and sizes. This one, an attack on Nordstrom after it canceled Ivanka Trump's clothing line. Some, these are familiar. In this case, the New York Times, he likes to take after the news media. And Republican senators. He even takes after Republican senators. This, a trademark Trump, a relatively new thing, a 3-parter attacking John McCain, who criticized a raid in Yemen. Why does the president do this? This is how he likes to communicate. Had a conversation the other day with the former Treasury Secretary, Secretary of State, and Ronald Reagan Chief of Staff in the White House, Jim Baker, who says back in the day, can't see Ronald Reagan on Twitter, but he says probably this president shouldn't do it, but you try to change his mind.
Back in our day, we had the issue of the day. It'd be pretty hard today to have the issue of the day if you don't know what the president's going to put on Twitter at 2 a.m. in the morning. You'd have to wait till then to find out what the issue of the day is. But look, it's been very successful for him. So who's to say? I mean, it worked. Nobody thought it would work. It worked. Maybe it'll work now, but I do think it makes it more difficult to have a well-oiled, well-coordinated approach where the administration can speak with one voice.
That was a very polite elder statesman trying to say, look, I know it works for you, sir, but I don't think this is a good way to govern. But in a polite way, Secretary Baker saying this. But even him, I had a conversation with him on camera, and then we were just shooting the breeze before and after the interview. He's fascinated by this because it's one of the things about this president that you look at it and you say, no way, can't do it that way. And yet, to his point, he says it's worked for him, so you try to tell him no.
Yeah, latest tweet this morning about Mark Cuban. Maybe that's the issue of the day that the White House wants to focus on. Hard to believe it is. And that was Baker's point, right? I mean, how do you drive a message out of this White House when you don't know what the president is going to say? He's tweeted a couple of times already this morning. Let's remember this is right after North Korea and this pretty important international crisis going on.
But this is what he likes.
This is what he likes. And there's no way
you learn in the morning what's on his mind or what he's reacting to, whether he's watching on television or reading the morning headlines. He takes after you guys quite a bit for doing your job. But what are we learning from it? A, he's not going to give it up, but is there anything else more strategic behind it?
That's the important thing. I mean, that to me is the real story of the first month of this presidency as far as the process goes. He's not going to give up the Twitter feed. And I just have to think that there are folks in the White House who are really unhappy about that.
Well, they tried it in the campaign. They tried it in the transition.
And it worked for a little bit in the campaign. But the fact that he's still doing this as the president of the United States, and the fact that nobody's really challenging him about it, to me is astonishing.
And it's not all sunshine and roses in Mark Cuban's here. He's hurt himself with the tweeting about the ban. The White House is trying to get away from calling the travel ban a ban, and exactly, and it's used in court. So this is actually, he's not to be the Debbie Downer here.
If his family and his staff won't challenge him about giving it up, nobody else is going to. I was on the Hill this week and talking to Republicans there, and they're fine with him doing it. They don't like it, and you can sort of tell with their grimaces, oh, what did he say now? But they've accommodated him. This is remarkable. Bob Corker, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, very important job. He told me that he now gets a printout every morning of whatever the president tweeted overnight.
Wow.
As one,
well, you have to.
As one friend
they're
joked,
going to get asked about it, right?
I mean, as one friend joked to me, back in the day, a senator on the Foreign Relations Committee would get printouts from the overnight cables from Tokyo or Bonn or what was coming in. Now you're getting the printouts of what the president is tweeting about. Right. So they're accommodating him. They're not sort of confronting him about his behavior. And if they're willing to do it,
but it is part of his style. He uses Twitter to counterpunch. He always says, "I don't throw the first punch." Sometimes he might, but most often he is counterpunching, reacting to something he doesn't like. But in public, too, there were stories this week that his own Supreme Court nominee said in meetings with senators he found it disheartening that he was attacking the so-called judges on the federal court. President Trump reacted to that. He didn't say, good for Judge Gorsuch. He said the media was making it up.
You misrepresented his comments totally.
I just wanted to ask you what your thoughts were, sir.
His comments were misrepresented, and what you should do is ask Senator Blumenthal about his Vietnam record that didn't exist after years of saying it did. So ask Senator Blumenthal about his Vietnam record. He misrepresented that just like he misrepresented Judge Gorsuch.
I'm old enough to remember reporters asking Donald Trump about his Vietnam record, which he did he have heel spurs? I believe was the issue. But the one thing I want to say, look, his approval rating is historically abysmal, so you can't get away from that. But to Jackie's earlier point, the Gorsuch, with the exception of some of this back chatter, and Gorsuch basically had to do that, in order to.
But why does Trump have to say the media is lying about it?
Wait, clarify, because that's what he. Wait.
Trump is wrong here, right?
Well, of course he's wrong. But I mean, we have look at the immigration ban policy. Look how it's polling. It has not lost any altitude. It's around 52, between 48 and 52%. It is a relatively popular policy. The Gorsuch legacy, as you said quite rightly, which is far and away the longest lasting legacy item that he's done in his first couple of weeks, went fairly well, and this guy is going to have a very easy time. So in terms of the actual deliverables, you know, it's funny, I had a Republican Senate staffer say to me the other day that executive orders are essentially press releases on steroids, right? You know, I don't want, that's overstating it a little bit. And the legislative battles are still to come. But so far, in terms of the more concrete and longer lasting decisions that he's made, they haven't been that terrible.
Yeah. And he's still at 90% approval among Republicans.
Holding that base is critical if you're underwater with the others. All right, everybody sit tight. Next, is House Priebus under attack by House Bannon? The palace intrigue around Team Trump and its early turf wars.
Any liberal democracy, any constitutional democracy relies upon something we call the objective truth. Now, some politicians fib and lie. In fact, almost all of them do to some extent. But they always do it in a way that pays some sort of deference to reality. And what we've discovered is that in the last 3 weeks, this president, rather like he did on the campaign trail, simply insists that black is white, that things that we can see with our own eyes, like the size of his inauguration crowd, are not exactly what we're seeing. And he's able to command his underlings to actually go out there and also say things that are empirically untrue. This is not about politics or ideology. Like, there are some things that Trump believes in, for example, a more restrained America around the world, immigration controls, for example, that I'm sympathetic to. It's about the ability for the president to tell the truth and for us to believe it. And to have such an unstable figure, incapable of accepting reality at the center of the world, is an extremely dangerous thing.
You said unstable. In your column, you said mentally unstable. Why do you think it's appropriate to be describing the president that way?
I'm not a shrink, and if I were, I wouldn't say this anyway, because you can't diagnose someone. But I'm a human being, and I can tell if someone is saying things that we know not to be true and never corrects it. For example, that the murder rate, which is a very solid statistic, you know, there are dead bodies we can count. When he says the murder rate is the highest it's been in 45 to 47 years, what are we supposed to do, Brian? Well, what is anybody supposed to do? This is simply completely bonkers. He's saying things that do not exist. When a president is saying things like that and doesn't correct himself, has no one correct him, we have fact checkers now every day of the week compiling lists and lists and lists of things he's saying that are empirically untrue, false. Now, I don't know whether he knows they're false, but if he doesn't know they're false, then he needs to be informed. Right. If he knows they're false and still saying it's true, then, and if he doesn't know, then he shouldn't be in that office.
After a weekend of over a foot coming down in much of the Northeast, going to see conditions improve, and notice still seeing some very wintry weather in place around the extreme eastern corner of Maine, where over 300,000 people underneath a blizzard warning this morning, and also about 20 million people dealing with the winter weather alerts that are in place. And the storm system, we think by about 5 or 6 p.m., it is all out of the picture. The snow showers with it begin to taper off, but it's the winds you're going to feel through much of this afternoon around New York City. And of course, you work your way into where it's snowing. That's where the blizzard conditions come in, where the forecast for the extreme eastern corner of the state of Maine there could still bring down another 10 to maybe 18 inches of fresh snow through tonight before this is all done with. And notice Boston points southward, not much left in the forecast there as far as snow. We'll go with 37 today in New York City, 34 in Boston, temps in Chicago in the mid-40s, in Atlanta in the lower 60s. But notice this, a trend that you might like, which by the end of the week at least takes us back up into the mid-40s and potentially into the mid-50s there by Sunday afternoon around New York City.
Like a favorite song that we love to sing. I've been influenced by many things in my music life, and they kind of work their way inside of me, and when I'm performing, it comes out. There is the sun and moon.
and dream hard and then work some more and keep God in your life, you be all right. That's what this is about.
Doing the music for the moment and doing it fully and thoroughly as I feel it. So however long my career is because of that, then that's the way it will be.
Part of an international collaboration led by the University of Sussex, we unveiled a blueprint to construct a large-scale quantum computer. Quantum physics is a very strange theory, predicting things like an atom can be at two different places at the same time. We are harnessing these very strange effects in order to build a new type of computer. These quantum computers will change all of our lives, revolutionizing science, medicine, and commerce. We show the nuts and bolts construction plan for such a device. We also present a new invention, how we built this computer using individual modules. These modules are then connected using electric fields, and we transport individual charged atoms from one module to another. This will allow us to build a quantum computer of any size, allowing us to achieve phenomenal processing powers. Here at the University of Sussex, we are now building a prototype device.
Now then, British scientists say they've created a blueprint for a new large-scale supercomputer which could solve problems that would take current machines billions of years to work out. The quantum computer, they're calling it, has the potential to solve the mysteries of the universe, maybe, and transform the forecasting of weather and the financial markets. In a minute, I'll be speaking to the physicist behind the breakthrough, Professor Winifred Hensinger from Sussex University. There he is, poised to explain it all. First, this is how it might work, and I just might understand some of it. Well, a classic computer processes information, as you probably know, using zeros and ones. That, of course, is binary code. Instead, a quantum computer uses atoms to encode information. It allows it, therefore, to process much more information all at once. If, for example, there was a phone book with 1 million names and numbers, you needed to find a specific number in it. Well, the science behind it says that because atoms can exist in different places at the same time, a quantum computer can look at all the numbers all at once. Now, to find the number, the conventional computer could take 1 million steps to find that number because it can only look in one place at one time. Another way to look at it is if there were 1 billion calculations to solve, currently 1 billion classic computers would be needed to work on each problem at the same time in order to equal the processing power of a quantum computer. Phew! Well, joining me now is Professor Hensinger, as I say, from Sussex University. Now, did it sound like I understood any of that? Because I didn't. Just why can this be so much more powerful? Explain that to us than current computers, which most people think are pretty powerful already.
This all relies on a very, very strange theory called quantum physics. Now, quantum physics has some very strange predictions. One of which is that an atom can be at 2 different places at the same time. Now
you've got me already. How is that possible?
It's mad. It's very, very strange, but it actually happens. So in the lab, we can actually make experiments, make a single atom appear 2 different places at the same time. Now, quantum physics has mystified physicists. Einstein called it spooky. People have tried and tried again to dispute these results and to see that can't be right. How can an atom be at 2 different places at the same time? But then, eventually, they had done so many experiments, they just said, okay, why don't we actually just try to tame these very strange effects to build an entirely new type of technology, and that's a quantum computing.
Okay, right. Well, and I'm also told that this is fiction becoming fact. Douglas Adams wrote about this kind of thing in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy 30, 40 years ago.
So imagine you have a computer which is capable of doing calculations where even the fastest supercomputer in the world would take 1 billion years to calculate.
Right.
So this is what this technology can do. It's unbelievably complicated technology. Don't think of it as a computer in your office. Think of it as a huge laboratory with lasers, vacuum systems, electronics everywhere. It's.
Well, does it exist yet, or is it all in your mind? I mean, if you got the theory right, have you actually built the machine?
Okay, so this is what we've just done. So in my group, for the last 10 years, we've developed quantum computing, and so have many groups around the world trying to develop quantum technology. And in fact, in the UK, there's a fantastic quantum technology program which accelerates Britain actually to very much to leadership in the world on this. But now what we've done now, and this is the big news here, is we've now moved away from academic studies and we've now published the actual nuts and bolts construction plan, how to put such a machine together. And so this is what we've published now, and we really show every single detail, every component you're going to have to add in order actually to build such a device.
I mean, the commercial possibilities are endless. Sounds like you could be the next Bill Gates or something like that. I mean, you know, to get to the boring stuff, the nitty-gritty. Have you got all the patents in place? Have you got the kind of business opportunities there? Or are you just excited, as I can see, by the theory?
It's very hard. So don't think of this as like an innovation which you're going to like quickly put together, and in 2 years' time you're going to set it in every shop. Now I'm going to have to tell you a little bit about how this thing actually looks like. It's, first of all, it's unbelievably tremendously complicated. We're going to have to hold individual atoms in a tremendously good vacuum.
So it's not going in a mobile phone anytime soon?
No, not anytime soon. You're going to have a device which actually maybe fits a building, possibly a whole football pitch. And this is so complicated to construct. You know, we may take 10 years or even longer to build a large-scale device. Now we've got the blueprint to do this. Now we're going to start to actually.
I was just going to jump in here, because then you could become a Bond villain or something like this. It sounds like you could control the world if this thing were built.
I think this is one of the reasons why we've now published this very openly and give this out to everybody to have a look at, also to help us with this and to collaborate. So as I said, like here in Britain, we have a fantastic quantum technology program, and so this is one of the things we really want to do, actually really now take academic study and push this into real exploitation.
Well, Professor Hensinger, very good to talk to you. Come back and tell us more as the development takes place.
High-level advisors close to then presidential nominee Donald Trump were in constant communication during the campaign with Russians known to U.S. intelligence. This is according to multiple current and former intelligence, law enforcement, and administration officials. President-elect Trump and then President Barack Obama were both briefed on the details of these extensive communications between suspected Russian operatives and people associated with the Trump campaign and the Trump business. And as you'll recall, last month during that big briefing, according to U.S. officials familiar with this matter, and both the frequency of the communications during the summer, we're told, during early summer, and the proximity to Trump of those involved raised a red flag with U.S. intelligence and law enforcement. According to these officials, the communications were intercepted during routine intelligence collection targeting Russian officials and other Russian nationals known to U.S. intelligence. And among several senior Trump advisors regularly communicating with Russian nationals were then campaign manager Paul Manafort and then advisor Michael Flynn, according to law enforcement and intelligence officials we've been speaking with. Manafort, as you'll recall, joined the campaign in March, and then he was out mid-August. Flynn stayed on and resigned as Trump's national security advisor until last night. That's when he resigned. And we should point out that we've reached out to both of them. Manafort, for one, has denied any communication with the Russians. We've repeatedly tried to reach out to Michael Flynn as well. We're awaiting a response, but officials emphasized on that communications between campaign staff and representatives of foreign governments, they're not unusual. However, these communications stood out to investigators due to the frequency and the level of the Trump advisors involved.
Michael Flynn's resignation as National Security Advisor after only just over 3 weeks on the job had been brewing for days. The retired general had become a lightning rod for criticism over his ties with Russia. It was a relationship dating back to 2015 when Flynn sat right next to Vladimir Putin at a dinner in Moscow. But it was December 29th, 2016 that became the beginning of the end for Flynn. That day, President Obama announced new sanctions against Russia, expelled 35 Russian diplomats, and closed 2 Russian compounds, all in retaliation for Moscow's efforts to influence the U.S. presidential election. That same day, Flynn had several phone calls with the Russian ambassador to the United States. The next day, December 30th, in what came as a surprise to the Obama administration, Putin said no Americans would be expelled from Russia and that he would await the inauguration of Donald Trump before taking any action. Then, President-elect Trump celebrated with a tweet, "Great move on delay," by V. Putin. "I always knew he was very smart." January 12th, Washington Post columnist David Ignatius first reports that Flynn had those phone calls with the Russian ambassador. But the White House insisted Flynn did not talk about sanctions in those calls.
The call centered around the logistics of setting up a call with the president of Russia and the president-elect after he was sworn in, and they exchanged logistical information on how to initiate and schedule that call. That was it, plain and simple.
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions against Russia.
But Flynn's calls were intercepted by the U.S. intelligence community. Secret transcripts show Flynn did discuss the sanctions, a potential violation of federal law prohibiting private citizens from engaging in diplomacy. Flynn was not yet in office. Law enforcement officials say Flynn made no promises about lifting sanctions and appeared to be trying to be vague. Alarmed, on January 26th, the Justice Department attempted to warn the White House. Acting Attorney General Sally Yates told White House counsel Don McGahn that Flynn misled the administration about his communications with the Russians and was potentially vulnerable to blackmail. This afternoon, Press Secretary Sean Spicer revealed the president himself was told the same day, January 26th.
Immediately after the Department of Justice notified the White House counsel of the situation, the White House counsel briefed the president and a small group of his senior advisors. When the president heard the information as presented by White House counsel, he instinctively thought that General Flynn did not do anything wrong, and the White House counsel's review corroborated that.
Last Friday, after the Washington Post first revealed to the public what those transcripts contained, the president said this.
What do you make of reports that General Flynn had conversations with the Russians about sanctions before you were sworn in?
I don't know about it. I haven't seen it. What report is that?
I haven't. Is reporting that he talked to the ambassador to Russia before you were inaugurated about sanctions, maybe trying to.
I haven't seen that. I'll look at that.
But it all came to a head Monday when the White House says President Trump asked Flynn for his resignation.
The issue here was that the president got to the point where General Flynn's relationship, misleading the vice president and others, or the possibility that he had forgotten critical details of this important conversation, had created a critical mass and an unsustainable situation. That's why the president decided to ask for his resignation, and he got it.
Is it possible these pokes and proddings by Russia right now are just a coincidence in terms of timing?
Probably not. I mean, we're seeing kind of it all. The spy ship floating around off of Delaware. It is in international waters, by the way. A stepped up of its missile that it violates a treaty. And both of those we've known about and have made appearances before. But we're also seeing these unsafe, provocative maneuvers by Russian planes against a U.S. ship in the Black Sea. And we're seeing this all, within a matter of days of each other. It's confusing because Russia says it wants a good relationship with the U.S. The Trump administration says it's open to a good relationship with Russia. But this is clearly Russia asserting itself. Doesn't like the sanctions that the Obama administration put on it after the allegations of hacking. It doesn't like those accusations leveled against it. It doesn't like the Russophobia that it keeps saying the U.S. has toward it. So it's Russia clearly putting itself out there, making itself known in these somewhat provocative ways. And the U.S. is, moving forward and trying to still work together, at least in some areas.